Did you know that Iceland is one of the most sparsely populated countries in the entire world? In fact, nearly 60% of the population is tightly clustered in or around one single city, meaning that the rest of the country is, well, empty. This might come as a bit of a surprise. After all, Iceland's tourism has increased hugely in recent years, and you've maybe even seen photos of a friend or acquaintance posing in front of an Icelandic volcano splashed across your social media feed. But despite its influx of tourists, Iceland isn't very populated. And a freak moment in history when Iceland lost about 20% of its population almost instantly sure didn't help. So why is this country so empty? Well, today on Across the Globe, we're going to look a little bit at why this is the case. First, let's get a bit of background on Iceland and its people. The total population of Iceland is a little less than 350,000. This ranks it number 39 out of Europe's 50 countries by population size. For reference, some of Europe's most populated countries include the United Kingdom, with approximately 69 million people, and France, with over 65 million people. That means that the population of Iceland is about 197 times smaller than that of the UK. I know, you're probably thinking that maybe Iceland just has a tiny landmass compared to the UK, but that's not actually the case. Iceland has a total land area of about 39,768 square miles, which is 103,000 square kilometers for all you metric users out there. The United Kingdom, on the other hand, has a landmass that's about double the size of Iceland at approximately 94,000 square miles. So it has about 2 times the amount of land as Iceland, yet Iceland's population is only a tiny fraction of the UK's. What all this means is that with a tiny population and a relatively large landmass, most of Iceland is empty. There are a few reasons that explain why Iceland is so sparsely populated. One is that a lot of it is uninhabitable. Remember when I mentioned Iceland's uptick in tourism in recent years? Well, people are flocking to Iceland for its natural beauty that includes landmarks like glaciers and volcanoes. But while people are clearly visiting those areas, no one's actually living there. In fact, there are about 269 glaciers in Iceland, which make up approximately 11% of the landmass of the entire country. Many of the glaciers are located in national parks like Vatnajökull National Park, which takes up about 14% of all of Iceland. Speaking of national parks, Iceland has 2 additional national parks, and while they're not as big as Vatnajökull National Park, they still take up some decent square footage. These are Snæfellsjökull National Park and Þingvellir National Park. Now, another big part of Iceland's beauty is its volcanoes. In fact, Iceland is home to about 200 volcanoes and contains 1/3 of the world's total lava. And these volcanoes aren't small, as about half of Iceland's total landmass is made up of volcanic desert areas. Because of this, only about 20% of the total area of Iceland is habitable. That's right, only 20%. That means that the landmass where people can actually live comes down from 39,768 square miles to about 8,000 square miles. For reference, that's about the size of the state of Massachusetts. So the fact that most of Iceland is uninhabitable brings us a little closer to understanding why most of Iceland is empty, but it still doesn't explain it all. After all, the population of the state of Massachusetts is about 7 million, way more than the 350,000 people who live in Iceland. So even its smaller livable landmass doesn't fully explain its tiny population density. Well, if you look at population growth rate, the picture becomes a little clearer. In 2018, Iceland saw a 2.7% increase in population, followed by 2.2% in 2019 and 1.6% in 2020. And the most recent year still was only a 1.6% increase. This might seem like a fair amount, especially when compared to other countries. After all, the UK only had a 0.4% increase in population in 2020. But remember, Iceland's population is tiny. So a 1.6% increase of about 350,000 people only means that the population grew by approximately 5,600 people. By contrast, a 0.4% increase in the UK's 69 million people means that their population is increasing by about 276,000 people. In other words, the fact that Iceland's population is so small to begin with means that it's just not going to be able to grow by that much. While Iceland is pretty easy to immigrate to if you're a citizen of the European Economic Area or European Free Trade Association, it's much harder if you're coming from a country like the United States. And of those who do manage to come to Iceland, or even for those who already live there, most of these people live in cities. That means, you guessed it, tons of empty land elsewhere in the country. The truth is, over 90% of people in Iceland live in cities, and the vast majority of them are in one city in particular. This city is Iceland's capital, the city of Reykjavik, which is located in southwestern Iceland, with a population of about 135,000 and a municipality that is the largest in Iceland. This is where most Icelanders live. When I say most, I'm not kidding. 60% of the entire population of Iceland lives in the municipality of Reykjavik. You heard that right. 6 out of every 10 people in Iceland live in this area. And what's not to love about Reykjavik? There's tons of natural beauty there, lots of culture, and it's home to the University of Iceland and the University of Reykjavik. What this means is that a lot of people choose to live in Reykjavik for the quality of life offered there, like job opportunities and lots of culture. But by choosing to live here, this leaves the rest of the country devoid of many people. Another attraction of living here is that while it can get cold in Reykjavik, it's certainly more hospitable than other areas of Iceland. Iceland's generally inhospitable climate brings me to the additional reason Iceland is empty. And this reason starts with a history lesson. In the 1800s, there were a fair number of people living in eastern Iceland who mostly made their living through farming. These people enjoyed a fairly pleasant existence until 1875. In 1875, something else surfaced in eastern Iceland, and that something was Askja. No, that's not the name of a Marvel villain, although it would probably make a good one. Askja is, in fact, a villain in Iceland's story, but it's not the kind that you think. Askja is a volcano, a very active one. But people living in eastern Iceland really didn't know much about its existence until it erupted on March 28 of 1875. This was a major eruption, on the scale of eruptions like Pompeii. Scientists even have a special name for volcanic eruptions of this magnitude. They call them PLINIAN eruptions. The eruption was so massive that the ashfall from it poisoned the land and killed livestock. Remember when I told you that the people who lived in this area mostly subsisted off of farming? Well, as you can guess, Askja's eruption destroyed the people of eastern Iceland's livelihood. Almost immediately, farms were essentially destroyed. So, what did these people do? Well, you might think that they simply moved to other areas of Iceland, like Reykjavik, for instance, but that's not actually the case. In fact, a large number of these people moved to the United States. In the late 19th century, there were approximately 10,000 to 15,000 Icelandic people who immigrated to the US. While that might not sound like a lot of people, it is when compared to Iceland's population at the time. That's right, these 10 to 15,000 people represented about 20% of Iceland's entire population. While this happened a long time ago, Askja hasn't backed down. Askja last erupted in 1961, serving as a reminder to the people of Iceland that they should stay far, far away from this country's volcanoes, leaving a great deal of the country empty as a result. Okay, I've thrown a lot of information at you. Before we share the final reason, let's do a quick recap of why Iceland is mostly empty. So, number 1, we've got the tremendous number of glaciers and volcanoes that makes Iceland beautiful, but largely uninhabitable. It would be cool to live right next to an active volcano, but it's not really practical. Next up, the population of Iceland is so small to begin with and so slowly growing that it can't really grow quickly enough for people to spread throughout Iceland and make it more populated. Number 3. Most people live in cities because of work opportunities and because the geography is more conducive to, well, human life. And 4th, a freak volcanic eruption drove people away from Iceland's volcanic regions for good. But there's one more reason that explains why Iceland is virtually empty, and that is Iceland's weather. With its location just south of the Arctic Circle, Iceland can get cold, really cold. Reykjavik actually has one of the more temperate climates in Iceland, as winters there only get to about 33 to 35 degrees Fahrenheit, and summers see about 54 degrees Fahrenheit on average. Other areas of Iceland aren't as lucky when it comes to the weather though, and because of this, not many people live there. For instance, the Highlands, which is the mountainous region in Iceland's center, are some of the coldest areas in Iceland. In the winter, the average temperature is only 14 degrees Fahrenheit. If that doesn't sound so bad, this will. The ground in the Highlands is frozen solid for about 8 months of the year. That means that most people can only access the area during the summer months. Bet you can guess what this means. Pretty much nobody lives there. What about why nobody lives in North Dakota? Watch this video to learn about that.